The December wind whipped through downtown Los Angeles with an unusual chill for Southern California, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of one of the city's rare winter storms. It was 3 days before Christmas 1993, and the streets around Skid Row were bustling with an odd mixture of last-minute holiday shoppers heading to and from the nearby fashion district and the ever-present population of homeless individuals seeking shelter from the approaching weather. Ozzy Osbourne had been in the area for a recording session at a studio in the Arts District, working on what would eventually become tracks for his Osmosis album. At 44, he was at a reflective point in his life, several years sober, increasingly aware of his mortality, and beginning to think more seriously about legacy and meaning beyond just making music. The session had run late, and rather than having his driver navigate the congested holiday traffic, he had decided to walk the few blocks to where his car was parked. As he made his way through the streets, collar turned up against the wind and hands shoved deep in the pockets of his black leather jacket, Ozzy was struck by the number of people he saw sleeping in doorways, huddled under bridges, and gathered around small fires in metal drums. Christmas was supposed to be about joy and giving, but here were hundreds of people who would likely spend the holiday cold, hungry, and alone. If you're enjoying this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more amazing moments of human kindness. It was near the corner of San Pedro and 5th Street that he first noticed her. She was small for what appeared to be her age, maybe 12 or 13 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that looked like they had been worn for weeks without washing. She was sitting on a piece of cardboard next to a chain-link fence, a thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders that did little to protect against the cold. What struck Ozzy most was not her obvious poverty, but the fact that she was reading, holding a battered paperback book close to her face in the dim light from a nearby street lamp. As he walked past, their eyes met for just a moment. She looked up from her book with the kind of alert intelligence that seemed incongruous with her circumstances, and something in her expression stopped him in his tracks. There was no pleading in her eyes, no practiced look of someone accustomed to begging. Instead, there was dignity, curiosity, and what appeared to be recognition. "Excuse me," she said quietly as he paused. "Are you Ozzy Osbourne?" The question surprised him. He was dressed down, wearing no makeup or theatrical clothing, and his hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Most people wouldn't recognize him in this context. "Yeah," he replied, crouching down to her level. "I am. What's your name?" "Sarah," she said, closing her book carefully and placing it beside her on the cardboard. "Sarah Michelle. I know your music. My dad used to play it before." She trailed off, looking away. "Before what, love?" Ozzy asked gently, his Birmingham accent making the words sound softer than they might have otherwise. "Before he died," Sarah said matter-of-factly, the way children often discuss tragedy, with an acceptance that adults find heartbreaking. "Car accident 6 months. Ago. Mum couldn't handle it and started using drugs. We lost our apartment, and then she left me at a shelter and never came back." Ozzy felt something tighten in his chest. Here was a child, alone on the streets 3 days before Christmas, talking about abandonment and loss with the kind of resigned matter-of-factness that spoke to experiences no child should have. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "About 2 weeks, Sarah replied. "The shelter was full and they said I'd have to wait. But I'm okay. I know how to take care of myself. Are you hungry?" Ozzy asked, though he could see the answer in her thin face and the careful way she held herself. Sarah hesitated for a moment, as if admitting hunger might be a sign of weakness. "Yes," she finally whispered. "I'm really hungry." What happened next was something that would be talked about for years among those who witnessed it, though few people actually saw the beginning of what unfolded. Ozzy stood up and looked around, spotting a small diner about a block away that was still open despite the late hour. "Come on then," he said, extending his hand to help her up. "Let's get you something to eat." Sarah looked at him with surprise and wariness. "I don't have any money." "I wasn't asking if you had money," Ozzy replied. "I was asking if you wanted some food." As they walked toward the diner, Sarah carrying her book and her thin blanket, she told Ozzy more about her situation. She had been living on the streets for 2 weeks, sleeping in doorways and park benches, eating whatever she could find or afford, with the few dollars she occasionally received from passers-by. She had avoided most of the shelters because she was afraid of being separated from her few possessions, or being placed in a system that might send her far away from Los Angeles, the last place she had lived with her father. "What's the book?" Ozzy asked as they walked. "The Outsiders," Sarah replied, holding it up. "I found it in a dumpster behind a bookstore. It's about kids who don't fit in anywhere." "I can relate to that," Ozzy said quietly. The diner was a typical 24-hour Los Angeles establishment. Bright fluorescent lights, red vinyl booths, and the smell of coffee and fried food. The few other customers were mostly night shift workers and insomniacs, people who wouldn't necessarily recognize a rock star or find it strange to see a man in leather jackets sharing a meal with a homeless teenager. Ozzy slid into a booth across from Sarah and watched as she stared at the menu with the intensity of someone who hadn't seen this much food listed in one place for a very long time. "Order whatever you want," he told her. "As much as you want." Sarah ended up ordering a cheeseburger, French fries, a chocolate milkshake, and a piece of apple pie. As they waited for the food, she told Ozzy more about her life before everything fell apart. Her father had been a mechanic who loved music, particularly rock and metal. He had introduced her to Black Sabbath when she was 8 years old, explaining that the music wasn't scary, but was actually about overcoming darkness and finding strength. "He said your songs were like stories about people who felt different or lost, but who found ways to survive," Sarah said. "He said that was important for me to understand, because everyone feels lost sometimes." When the food arrived, Ozzy watched Sarah eat with the careful enthusiasm of someone who wasn't sure when her next meal might come. She tried to eat slowly and politely, but her hunger was evident in the way she savored every bite. "This is the best meal I've had in..." She paused to think. "Maybe ever. Thank you." "You're welcome," Ozzy replied, but he was already thinking beyond just this one meal. "Sarah, where are you planning to sleep tonight?" "I found a spot under an overpass that's pretty dry," she said. "It's not too bad." Ozzy was quiet for a moment, processing the casual way this child discussed sleeping rough in December. "That's not acceptable," he said finally. "It's okay," Sarah said quickly, apparently worried that she had complained or seemed ungrateful. "I'm used to it now. No child should be used to sleeping under bridges," Ozzy said firmly. "Especially not at Christmas." What happened next was something that the diner's overnight waitress, Maria Gonzalez, would never forget. Ozzy excused himself from the table and walked to the payphone near the restroom. Maria couldn't hear the entire conversation, but she could see him talking intensely, occasionally gesturing as he spoke. When he returned to the table, his expression was determined. "Sarah, I've made some phone calls. There's a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen who runs a program for kids in situations like yours. She's coming to meet us." "I don't want to go to another shelter," Sarah said, fear creeping into her voice for the first time. "They always want to split people up or send you far away." "This isn't a shelter," Ozzy explained. "Dr. Chen runs a program that helps kids find permanent homes with families who understand what they've been through. But more than that, she helps kids continue their education and pursue their interests." Dr. Chen arrived at the diner about 30 minutes later. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile, and she had a way of talking to Sarah that was respectful rather than condescending. Instead of talking about Sarah as if she weren't there, she asked Sarah directly about her experiences, her hopes, and her fears. "I don't want to be a burden on anyone," Sarah said. "And I don't want to go somewhere where I can't read or learn." "Reading and learning are exactly what we encourage," Dr. Chen replied. "In fact, we have several families who specifically want to help children who are academically gifted, but have faced difficult circumstances." As they talked, Ozzy learned more about Dr. Chen's program. It was a private organization funded by donations that specialized in finding permanent placements for older children and teenagers who had aged out of traditional adoption programs or who had experienced trauma that made standard foster care inappropriate. "We focus on matching children with families based on interests and personality rather than just availability," Dr. Chen explained. "For someone like Sarah, who clearly loves reading and learning, we would look for a family that values education and intellectual curiosity." But Ozzy wasn't done. As the conversation continued, he made another decision that surprised everyone, including himself. "Dr. Chen, what does your program need most?" he asked. "Funding," she replied honestly. We're always operating on a shoestring budget. We can help kids like Sarah, but we can only help as many as our resources allow. Ozzy was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his checkbook. What would it cost to fully fund your program for a year, to help every kid who needs it? Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Mr. Osbourne, that would be approximately $500,000. Without hesitation, Ozzy began writing a check. Consider it done. The silence at the table was profound. Sarah stared at Ozzy in disbelief, while Dr. Chen looked at the check as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Mr. Osbourne, Dr. Chen said quietly, this is incredibly generous, but no buts. Ozzy interrupted. Sarah isn't the only kid out there spending Christmas on the streets. If your program can help others like her, then that's what needs to happen. He turned to Sarah, who had tears in her eyes. And Sarah, I want you to know something. This isn't charity. This is an investment. Your father was right about my music being for people who feel different or lost. Well, you're not lost anymore. You're found, and I expect great things from you. But Ozzy still wasn't finished. Over the next hour, as Dr. Chen made calls to arrange temporary housing for Sarah while a permanent placement was found, Ozzy made additional calls of his own. He contacted his lawyer, his accountant, and his manager, setting up what would become the Sarah's Hope Foundation, a permanent charitable organization dedicated to helping homeless and at-risk youth. Why are you doing all this? Sarah asked as they prepared to leave the diner. Ozzy looked at this remarkable young girl who had maintained her dignity and intelligence despite circumstances that would have broken many adults. Because your father was right about my music, and you reminded me what it's really supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about helping people who feel lost find their way home. Dr. Chen was able to place Sarah with a family within a week, a childless couple who were both teachers and who had specifically requested to help an intellectually gifted child who had experienced trauma. The placement was successful from the beginning, with Sarah thriving in an environment that valued education and provided the stability she had been missing. But the story didn't end there. The media attention surrounding Ozzy's spontaneous act of generosity brought national awareness to the issue of homeless youth. The Sarah's Hope Foundation grew rapidly, with donations pouring in from fans and other celebrities who were inspired by the example. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped place over 200 homeless youth in permanent homes and had established educational scholarship programs in 12 cities. Sarah herself became something of a spokesperson for the organization, speaking at fundraising events about her experience and the importance of seeing homeless children as individuals with potential rather than just statistics. She excelled academically in her new home, maintaining straight A's throughout high school and eventually earning a full scholarship to UCLA, where she studied social work with a specialization in child welfare. Her goal was to work with homeless youth, helping other children navigate the system that had helped save her life. Ozzy stayed in touch with Sarah throughout her educational journey, attending her high school graduation and later her college graduation. At each milestone, he reminded her of that night in the diner when she had chosen to trust a stranger who offered help. You taught me something important that night, he told her at her college graduation. You taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply notice when someone needs help and then do something about it. Years later, when Sarah earned her master's degree in social work and began working for a major non-profit organization helping homeless youth, she would often tell her clients about the night a rock star changed her life by doing something simple, treating her like a human being worthy of dignity and help. The story became part of rock and roll folklore, but more importantly, it became a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of kindness are the spontaneous ones, the moments when someone sees suffering and simply decides to act. Ozzy would often say in later interviews that the encounter with Sarah changed him more than it changed her. She reminded me that beyond all the music and the fame and the business, the most important thing is how we treat each other when no one is watching, when there's nothing in it for us except the knowledge that we helped another human being. The Sarah's Hope Foundation continued to operate for decades, eventually helping thousands of homeless youth find permanent homes and educational opportunities. And at the heart of it all was a simple moment of human connection between a rock star and a homeless girl who had the courage to say, "I'm hungry," and the wisdom to accept help when it was offered. Thank you for reading this incredible story of compassion and human kindness. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the power of caring for one another and the difference one moment of kindness can make.